So what I'm going to do tonight is really very simple. I'm going to be looking at the psalm, and looking at it in three sections. The first is just what it says. The second is what it means. And then finally, we're going to look at what it has to teach us. And I'm going to look at some language-based stuff, going to look at some comparisons with other scriptures, one passage from the Heavenly Doctrines, but mostly just going to be letting the 23rd Psalm speak for itself. So I have a slightly different translation to share with you. This is a translation that I did myself from the Hebrew, and it's very literal. And just something to mention is that whenever you're translating poetry, which the 23rd Psalm is, it's a song, there's this inevitable tension between the poetic quality of the song or poem and what it actually means. And the famous King James Version, or the New King James Version, which I read, I think actually does an incredibly good job of striking a balance between those things. It has a pretty strong poetic quality, which is one of the reasons it's so beloved, but it's actually pretty accurate too, which is always nice when that happens. But I'm going to share a translation that's strictly literal with no poetic quality, just for the sake of seeing as close as we can what it's really saying in the Hebrew. So could we put that up on the screen? Great. So just going through this, well, I'll read it first and then I'll go through it line by line. The Lord is my shepherd, I will not lack. He makes me lie down in grassy pastures. He guides me to waters of rest. He restores my soul. He leads me in tracks of righteousness for his name's sake. Even when I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You arrange a table before me in front of my adversaries. You make my head fat with oil. My cup has abundance. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for length of days. It's hard not to slide back into the very, very familiar King James Version as I read that. But as you saw, the two versions are really not that different, which is a credit to the translators of the New King James Version, or King James Version, who made it sound so good and be accurate at the same time. The first point I'd like to make about the language is that the word shepherd, the Lord is my shepherd, it's actually a verb there, or a participle to be particular. It means the one shepherding me, but it has this active quality, this active idea. It seems like an important note about the way the psalm begins. The Lord is the one shepherding me. I shall not want. And some of the the children when I teach this psalm to children in Olivet School, sometimes that statement is very confusing. I shall not want. Am I not allowed to want stuff? What does that mean? Presumably most of us have worked out that really that means I shall not be wanting for anything. I won't lack anything. I won't need anything. It's kind of an archaic use of the word want, but it's so familiar. The King James Version says, he'll make me lie down in green pastures, which works, but the idea there is grass or something that sheep would eat. That's an important part of the idea. The still waters of rest is more literal translation. The Lord leads me in tracks of righteousness. And the word for tracks seems to be related to words for a cow or a cart. So it's the word for probably for the ruts made by the wheels of a cart. And so the tracks of righteousness, it's sort of this groove that you slide into almost, this track that's carrying you in the right direction. You're on the right track. And then it says a little later, the Lord's rod and staff are comforting. And I've occasionally wondered what's the difference between the two of those? They sound awfully similar. The simplest way to put it is that the rod is a stick, but as a symbol of authority, whereas the staff has connotations of support. The staff, the root word there is support, whereas the rod is like a scepter. It's a symbol of status or identity. Make the word enemies, you prepare a table before me in front of my adversaries or enemies. That's another participle, so it's that active idea, the people who are being hostile to me. And then we have that phrase, you make my head fat, which is a great example of why extremely literal translation isn't always a good idea. That is what it says in the Hebrew. That means something a little different if you just say it in English to the casual listener. So the idea is that the Lord is pouring oil over our heads. And that comes through very well in translation, you anoint my head with oil. But more literally, he's making our head fat, which maybe suggests abundance or completeness. And then similarly with the cup, my cup runs over. That word means full and then more than full. There's abundance, there's fullness. And it's a good and truth pairing, of oil and the cup holding water or perhaps wine. But we'll come to that kind of thing in a minute. And then the last difference in the more literal translation is this, that it says, I will dwell in the house of the Lord for length of days. Hebrew doesn't really have a word for forever. Hebrew can sort of express this idea of time without time, timelessness, but it doesn't really have a word for forever. And length of days is sort of the best way of expressing that idea of forever, but it has this way of keeping the notion of forever grounded in the present. It's day after day for all the extent of all the days, but it's still grounded in that singular day, in the now. So that is the psalm, which we're fairly familiar with, just a few new ideas thrown in there. I'm going to go back and look at it some more, just touching on a few points about what it is saying, even just in the literal sense, what it's telling us. The opening line is this statement about needing nothing, this all-encompassing statement, there is nothing that I need. And then it lists some basic necessities, grassy pastures, which are the food for the sheep, waters of rest, which are the water. And then it says, the Lord restores my soul, so the Lord feeds us, he gives us water, and then he restores the soul. So he does it all over again, but on a deeper level this time. And there's almost a suggestion that it goes on and on like that. On every level, he gives us what we need and he lifts us to the next level. And so it affirms that statement that we have everything we need. Note how many of the words right in those opening lines have a suggestion of rest. He makes me lie down in grassy pastures, leads me to waters of rest. He restores my soul. A lot of that imagery of peace, rest. It says that he leads me in the tracks of righteousness for his name's sake. And I think what that means is that he leads me in the tracks of righteousness because he cannot do otherwise. He leads me in the tracks of righteousness because his name requires it. And if he didn't do that, he wouldn't be who he is. If he didn't lead me, he would not be Jehovah. And then there's the valley of the shadow of death. I don't think that particular construction appears anywhere else in the scriptures, but there's a couple more mentions of the shadow of death. And it's an image that doesn't need a lot of explanation. It's a symbol for darkness that's more than physical. It's spiritual darkness, the darkness of hell and evil and death. Just a I'll just read a couple other places in the scriptures where that phrase, the shadow of death, appears, just because it helps to get a sense of what that phrase is identifying. From the 107th Psalm, those who sat in darkness and in the shadow of death, bound in affliction and irons, because they rebelled against the words of God and despised the counsel of the Most High. Therefore he brought down their hearts with labor. They fell down, and there was none to help. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them out of their distress. He brought them out of darkness and the shadow of death and broke their chains in pieces. And one more, pretty well-known one from Isaiah. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in the land of the shadow of death, upon them a light has shined. So it's through darkness, through affliction, through bondage, through fear, through death, all of that the Lord leads the psalmist. And then it says that he prepares a table before my face in front of my adversaries. The Hebrew word there that I've translated as in front of, it means right there in plain sight, conspicuously, with the other person standing looking at you. So the image is that the enemies are standing there physically, but it's almost as if the Lord is ignoring them as he prepares this table for us. And this is where I'll get out my illustrations. I have a book here. It's just the words of the 23rd Psalm, illustrated by Richard Jesse Watson. And he does a really great job. Just very reverent illustrations to the words of the Psalm. I'm just going to try and go over them very briefly as I get to the one that I want to show you. This is way too quick, I know, but okay, here's the one that I'm coming to. This is the illustration of the statement, "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies." Throughout the illustrations, he shows children as the speaker. So here they are with their table, the Lord standing over them. And then he's got this representation of evil up here in the corner that's right there, but the Lord himself, or it's sort of his cloak, is the barrier. So the darkness, the shadow of death, the enemies, they're right there, and yet because the Lord is there, the children are sitting down to eat. And that's very much the idea that word, that in front of word, communicates to us. And then that statement that he anoints our head with oil and our cup runs over. It's clearly a symbol of gifts beyond what we could measure, gifts beyond what we could ask for, enough and more than enough. And it echoes the Lord's words in Luke when he tells us, "Give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom." The Lord is not going to hold back. He's going to give us as much as we can possibly hold. And the image, both the oil and the cup, there's the image of running down or overflowing, or a suggestion of that imagery. And the psalm ends with the statement, "Surely, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Such a confident statement. The whole psalm from beginning to end is this unequivocal affirmation that we have everything. Nothing is missing. Nothing is lacking. There is nothing to fear. We are safe. There can be no doubt that we are safe. And so, what's the psalm teaching us? Why did the Lord give us the psalm? Well, that's maybe a silly question when I just said what the psalm teaches us. It's obvious. One of the reasons the psalm is so well loved is because it's so clear. It's so understandable. The message is that we have enough, that there's nothing to worry about. It is interesting that this idea that the Lord is a shepherd is so universal, so well known. I was surprised how few passages in Scripture there are, or at least that I could find, that explicitly call the Lord a shepherd. It's just that some of the ones that do call the Lord a shepherd happen to be extremely well known, like the 23rd Psalm. Here's a few more, just by way of building out the picture. In Isaiah it says, "He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs with his arm and carry them in his bosom and gently lead those who are with young." In Ezekiel he says, "As a shepherd seeks out his flock on the day he is among his scattered sheep, so will I seek out my sheep and deliver them from all the places where they were scattered on a cloudy and dark day. And I will bring them out from the peoples and gather them from the countries, and I will bring them to their own land. I will feed them on the mountains of Israel, in the valleys and in the inhabited places of the country. I will feed them in good pasture, and their fold shall be on the high mountains of Israel. There they shall lie down in a good fold and feed in rich pasture on the mountains of Israel. I will feed my flock, and I will make them lie down, says the Lord God. I will seek what was lost and bring back what was driven away, bind up the broken and strengthen what was sick. But I will destroy the fat and the strong and feed them in judgment." That last statement there is maybe a little jarring in context of the more beautiful imagery in the rest of that passage. But this whole section in Ezekiel, where the Lord talking about rescuing his scattered sheep, it's an excerpt from a longer passage in which the Lord is rebuking the false shepherds, the leaders of the church who led the people astray, who preyed on the sheep instead of taking care of them. And so the Lord is saying that he will come to be a genuine shepherd instead of the predatory shepherd. And then one more very well-known shepherd passage, this time from John. "I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep. But the hireling, he who is not the shepherd, one who does not own the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf catches the sheep and scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and does not care about the sheep. I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and am known by my own. As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have which are not of this fold, them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd." So how can you doubt that the Lord is a shepherd after hearing him say those words? It's interesting, though, that here again he contrasts himself with less than adequate shepherds, the hirelings who don't care for the sheep. His point is that he's not looking after us because it's just his day job and then he goes home and forgets about us. He is invested. We belong to him. We're precious to him. And so he says he'll lay down his life for us, which of course he did. He laid down his life, even to the utmost, for us. That I've spoken about this before, but there's that passage touches on the necessity for shepherds to be tough, to be expected to put themselves in danger for the sake of their sheep. David talks about fighting lions and bears when he was out watching his father's sheep. He fought off wild animals to save the sheep. And that's part of the identity, that that there's some muscle behind the idea of a shepherd. That the Lord as our shepherd, He's not just sort of watching us as we graze on green fields, basking in the sunshine. It's a protective role. He is prepared to lay down His life to keep us safe. This image of Him as a shepherd, though, it's so familiar, so commonplace, that sometimes the implication gets lost or forgotten. If the Lord is a shepherd and we are sheep, what is that saying about our relationship? One of the really obvious implications is that the sheep are not giving constructive feedback to the shepherd. It's not a reasoned decision about whether we go this way or that way, point and counterpoint. The shepherd's job is to lead, and the sheep's only job is to follow. And that right there, that is telling us something. So sheep are symbols of innocence. Lambs especially are symbols of innocence. But I've been told, though I certainly don't know from firsthand experience, that sheep are not necessarily the easiest to lead. They can be ornery. They can require a lot of coaxing. Sound familiar? But the fact remains, in a relationship between shepherd and sheep, or shepherd and sheep, there's really only one way that it goes. The shepherd is the leader. But there's all those other implications, though, of the shepherd protecting the sheep, caring for the sheep, leading the sheep to the things they need, the food, the water, being willing to put himself in danger for the sake of the sheep. All of that is also part of the relationship. But more than just the idea that the Lord is a shepherd, this psalm is telling us that it's okay, telling us not to worry, perhaps, or showing us what it looks like to not worry. The whole psalm is sort of summed up in those 4 words, I shall not want. There's nothing lacking. You could use a lot of different words to summarize the psalm. Words like contentment, peace, all of those would work. But one that stands out for me is safety. It's a psalm about being safe with the Lord. And it brings that point home partly because it includes some reasonably vivid imagery about evil. The valley of the shadow of death is a powerful image, clear representation of any evil that we've seen, any evil that we've dealt with, any evil that we've felt. Sure, that belongs in the valley of the shadow of death. We can fill in that blank with whatever it is that we're dealing with. And the psalm is talking about that. The psalm is talking about the Lord's presence with us there, in the valley of the shadow of death. And the message is that we're safe, even there. I didn't finish showing you the Watson illustrations. Let's see now. I got to this page. And then we have my cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. That image has always touched me, just the power of the lion and the tenderness of the lamb, and the girl sleeping safely. It's a very compelling image of the safety that the whole psalm is trying to communicate to us. The Lord is with us. The Lord is guarding us. The Lord is watching us even when we're asleep, which of course is a symbol of our mortal weakness. Just as a total tangent, why do we sleep for a third of our lives? Why did the Lord build us so that a third of our lives we're, you might say, doing absolutely nothing? What's the point of that? Well, perhaps the point, at least one outcome of that setup, is that we're forced to admit that we have limits. We can go so far and then we need to fall apart. It's built into our biology. And there's a message there for sure. But to go back to the 23rd Psalm, where is the valley of the shadow of death in your life? Where have you felt that? Where have you felt the long and lonely road, the dark road, the place full of fear or confusion or anxiety? As I said, pretty much any of our demons can be found there in that valley of the shadow of death. Whatever it is we're facing, it's there on that road. The Lord is telling us in the psalm that we can be there, be in the valley of the shadow of death, and yet at the very same time be safe. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And the rod and staff both represent power, and they represent the power of truth from good, the power of the Lord's truth, spoken to us, given to us from His love. And this is another tangent, but the Lord shows us in His Word that one of our most powerful tools against evil is statements from His Word, quotes from His Word. They're very, very powerful comforts. And so the 23rd Psalm itself could be one of those rods to comfort us. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. But in more practical terms, how are we achieving this kind of internal invulnerability, this safety in the midst of whatever the heck it is? The Lord talks to us about being in the world but not of the world. And so this idea comes mostly from what's called His intercessory prayer in the Gospel of John. And in that prayer, speaking of His disciples, the Lord says, I do not pray that you should take them out of the world, but that you should keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them by your truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, I also have sent them into the world. So there's an important nuance captured there in those words. The Lord sends His disciples into the world, but they're not of the world. They don't belong to the world. That's tended to be an idea that Christians come back to, a sort of a definition of what it means to be a Christian, to be in the world but not of the world. And that echoes the idea of being in the valley of the shadow of death but not of it, being in the valley of the shadow of death, but above it, afraid, untouched by it, unafraid. And what does that, again, what does that mean in practical terms? To be in the world but not of the world. What's the difference? The difference is obviously where our heart is. It's where our heart is that changes, moves us from the one to the other. When we want worldly things, when we love worldly things, when we live for worldly things, then we're drawn into the world and we become part of it. And this happens to us all the time. By default, this is where we tend. We get pulled down into this so easily. You could be having such spiritual thoughts, and then the gas light on your car comes on, and you think about how much money you've spent on gas lately, and poof, there it goes. Now you're of the world again, because your heart is out there sucking up worldly things. But the thing about living in the world, being of the world, is that, well, we open our heart to the world, and the world flows through our heart. The world, with all of its junk, flows through our heart. And then just the opposite happens when we're living for something heavenly. When we set our hearts on something heavenly, and when we can hold our minds above all of these worldly things, all of these worldly enticements, these worldly anxieties, because what we love and what we're looking for transcends all of that stuff, well, then we can look down on it. We can see it being around us, but not quite touching us. So it is the
No, it's I just saw a question that came up here
earlier. Oh, okay, we have a question. Yes, please ask.
I guess when you had the the line up earlier, somebody's asking, does the lion represent good or evil?
Oh, okay. That's a good question. I'm glad you're asking questions. Representations in the Word are extremely contextual, and so a lot of the time a lion does represent evil, and in that, in places like Daniel being in the lion's den. But the way representations in the Word work is that you're drawing from this, complex, three-dimensional, organic thing. You're drawing out one facet of it to highlight as a symbol. So in the case of, in a place where a lion has a bad representation, it would be the lion's, predatory nature, its flesh-eating nature. That would be the idea you're meant to be focusing on. But the lion does, in other parts of the Word, it clearly represents the Lord. It's explicitly used as a symbol for the Lord. And in those cases, it's the power, the strength, and maybe the zeal and the courage. If you've ever seen videos, lions do have this way of just sort of charging into battle. That kind of ferocity, but as a zeal to protect. That's the idea that we're meant to be thinking of when a lion is used as a symbol for the Lord. And so a lion doesn't really represent anything outside of its context in specific portions of the Word. Hopefully that answers the question. Please fire off any more if you have any more. So the thing that I was talking about, this idea of living for the world or living for heaven, it sounds almost stupidly simplistic. If you say, think about heaven and you'll be fine. Think about heaven and your problems will go away. That's not, that's too trite to be helpful. But That said, it is kind of remarkable just how much everything, the whole paradigm, can tilt and become something very different if we're really thinking about life as something eternal. If we're really thinking about life in heavenly terms. Because then, this little shard, this speck, this veil that we're in right now, it matters a whole lot less. And the possibility of whatever we're facing now turning out all right in the end looks a whole lot different when in the end means in heaven. When in the end means a brand new start in a kingdom where so many of these worldly problems simply don't exist. And so if your life, if somebody's life is just an odyssey of suffering, if our lives are hard and the deck seems stacked against us right from the beginning, and that's our story, all the decades of our time on earth, and yet sort of underneath it in secret, the Lord is saving that person's soul, and they wake up in heaven. The whole story is a happy one. The whole story has a happy ending, and most of it, 99% of it, more than 99% of it, is a happy story. These worldly things, they're dust that blows away. And of course we don't see it that way all the time. But the more we think about the life the Lord is leading us towards, the easier it is to recognize the truth of what he tells us in the psalm, that he can keep us safe. He can bless us. It says in the psalm, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. So here's an illustration from the Heavenly Doctrines, and would you put up that layout? An illustration of how thinking in the terms that the Lord invites us to think in changes our perspective. This is a passage from Arcana Celestia, or Heavenly Secrets, number 6325. It reads, "It is an eternal truth that the Lord rules over heaven and earth. Also that no one apart from the Lord is self-existent. Consequently, that all life flows in. Life filled with goodness flowing in from the Lord. Life filled with evil flowing in from hell. This is what they believe in the heavens. And when a person shares their belief, which he is able to do when he is governed by good, evil cannot be attached to him or accepted as his own, because he knows that it does not originate in him but in hell. When this is a person's state, peace can be granted to him, for he trusts solely in the Lord." That the simple understanding that everything flows in, every last thought and feeling within us has flowed in from somewhere. That idea changes everything if we really, really accept it, really think that way. Everything that we have is coming to us moment by moment from above or from below. And that means that moment by moment we have total freedom to stop the current that flows from below, or to turn away, to look up. And moment by moment, the power, the presence, the life, the Spirit of the Lord are flowing into us, and they can be there now. If we make space, if we make our hearts an empty vessel ready to receive. We're told in the Heavenly Doctrines that creation is a perpetual recreation, or that continued existence is a continued coming into existence. Which means that every second and every fraction of a second, the Lord is creating everything all over again as if for the first time. And so that means that if we change how we want to live, He makes us new then and there. And that new choice becomes the new reality then and there. And if we choose to look up and remember the Lord's purpose, to remember that He is with us, then and there He is with us. So we can put away the AC layout, by the way, just to make the video a little bigger again. So the point, the bottom line, is that we have the power to choose. If we choose the world, we get the world. If we're living for worldly delights, well, we get them. We can get wealth, we can get power, we can get a snack, we can watch our favorite TV show. But if those are where our heart is invested, well, our heart is out there in the world amongst all of the anxieties of the world, and they're going to flow into us. Or are we going to live for something heavenly, live life with just a little bit of that heavenly perspective tucked away and guiding us? Because it changes everything if we can do that. It changes how much the world is able to touch us. And to be fair, sometimes the hells hold on to us really tight. Sometimes we get mired down, we get rooted in something that we can't see our way out of, because it's a self-perpetuating state of anxiety or depression or anger or whatever it might be. Sometimes the hells get us by threatening the very things that we think of as our refuge. So the hells threaten our church or the sanctity of the Lord's word, or they threaten the people we love. They threaten our relationships that we rely on. And so we feel like we can't rise above it, because the place that we would rise to is the place that's under attack. The citadel is under siege. But that's all their trick, their illusion. They can't actually touch those things. They can't touch anything that actually belongs to the Lord. They can't touch the true church. And they can't touch the soul of anybody whom you love, not while that person seeks the Lord's protection. Any of the things that endure forever, are out of hell's reach. They're in the Lord's hands. Hell cannot take what belongs to the Lord. Hell can't take away our freedom. All that they can touch is the point where those things intersect with the world, intersect with all of this natural stuff around us. And yeah, they can have an effect on all of that stuff, but in the long run, what does it really matter? Because the part that endures is with the Lord. The part that endures is in the Lord's hands. Though we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, He is there with our spirit. He says He prepares a table before us in the presence of our foes, right there, with all of this anxiety, with all of this stuff, with all of this worldly junk flowing at us. Our spirit can sit down with the Lord and know that it is safe, that nothing can touch it. The Lord is our shepherd. The The Lord is feeding us heart and soul. And yeah, it sure seems like a lot goes wrong in this world. But maybe an awful lot of that stuff going wrong is really just a veil that's thrown over the face of the true story, which is that the Lord, day by day and moment by moment, is welcoming thousands of people into His heaven, where they will dwell in His house forever. He's got our hearts and our souls. The Lord is our shepherd. We shall not want. And that's it from me for tonight. If any more questions came through, we can take them now. Type away as rapidly as you can if you have another question, and if not, no worries there. The 23rd Psalm is always a tough one to talk about, just because it's so beloved and so said so much in so few words. It almost feels like a betrayal to try and add anything to it. But I hope that this was helpful to you.